Oh my goodness, it's getting so hard not to read the manga. Like, that cliffhanger is so annoying. It's so annoying. It's so annoying, man. It's so annoying. Because, like, oh, I hate it. Like, the episode felt so short. It felt 5 minutes, man. It felt like 5 minutes. Ugh. I hate that, man. Like, it's the best and worst feeling of watching a freaking good show. And what's worse, though, about all of this is the fact that this is fan sub, which I appreciate, people are fan subbing it, but it sucks because with fan subs, the translations can vary because obviously it's Saturday now with the time of me talking about this, and I watched it this Saturday, but sometimes the episodes come out Friday, sometimes they could come out, late Thursday, and obviously it's later than normal, and it sucks, because it's like, oh, I could potentially wait a lot longer than normal for next episode, or a little bit less, I don't really know, and it sucks. It sucks. I want to read the manga, but I'm resisting, because I want to, stay anime only, because obviously Summertime Rendering is going to be focusing its entire anime run length for the entire manga, like, it's going to follow the entire manga and conclude the series with its actual season. So because of that, I'm trying to stay anime only, but it sucks. Like, oh goodness, like that cliffhanger today, that's painful. It's painful, like seriously, because I've talked about this in my previous, reviews. Like, Shinpei, we know he's gonna die again. Common sense. Like, we're too early into the story. Like, we're on episode 10, there's gonna be 23, 24 episodes or whatever. Shinpei's gonna die again. So another loop is gonna happen. So the question I have now is thanks to what we had for this episode, with them basically dungeon crawling and going into the basement, the bowels of the island itself to find out secrets of shadows and all that, will Shinpei die down there to these group of shadow babies, or will he be able to go a little bit further, and will we get more information? Because one of the big things about these loops, obviously, is to gather information, and it's what makes, Summertime Rendering interesting, and also ReZero, why people love ReZero as well, is because every time, let's say, Subaru does a loop, he's trying to figure out, let's say, who killed him, how he died, what led up to those events to allow him to even get to that point of dying, etc., and he's always trying to figure out new information. So Summertime Rendering follows something very similar to that mystery, that intrigue of trying to find out, how will Shinpei die this loop, and how could he prevent maybe the same mistakes that he made from the previous loop. It's a very nice way to get people motivated and interested in the narrative, and I love this series for that. But, it sucks, man. It sucks. It sucks that we have them completely surrounded, and there is that possibility that, Ushio is probably going to die, which, I guess let's talk about that, okay? Obviously, we know Shinpei's probably going to die, maybe. But, Ushio, that's up for debate, because obviously Ushio, she's on a time limit. We know that these shadows basically are on kind of like a time limit, especially since she's injured and her body's permanently damaged pretty much. I don't think there's probably going to be a way for her to fully recover. And as she continues to go through these loops, etc., she's going to take more damage. She's basically going to have more things happen to her, which if she, let's say, dies, is there not going to be another Ushio? And that's another curious question, because what Shinpei brought up in this episode actually started to make me think about it. I was like, okay, if the Ushio that we're currently with in the story, with the narrative right now, is she actually the Ushio that's going to be coming out of the water on the 24th? And if that's the case, does that mean that there's going to be, two Ushios, Shadow Ushios, at once? Is that a possibility? Is that actually going to happen? And that's a question that started entering into my mind, because technically we don't know. For all we know, the shadow that we have our Ushio as right now, we know she traveled with Shinpei to a different loop, but that's probably not the Ushio that's actually in the water somewhere, just as sludge right now, until she wakes up basically on the final day. So that is something I want to point out, is that there is a possibility of the fact that we're going to have two Shadow Ushios, and the Ushio that we're currently with is going to die as well, and Shinpei's going to have to start over his journey with another Shadow Ushio, which would be crazy if that's the case. But there's another way to look at this as well, that, the data. Since if there's a possibility that there could be two shadows, could the Shadow Ushio copy the other Shadow Ushio? And if that's the case, How would that work? Like, legitimately, how would that work? Like, could she actually get the data? Or, so many questions. But, anyways, let's talk about some other stuff besides that, obviously. Let's talk about what we learned. The lore, the world building, etc. So, for one, the very clinic, the ruins in the middle of the forest that we've kind of see slowly, gradually built up in the past few episodes, we get to go inside of it and see kind of what's going on, basically how old the building is, how the modern day practices that we have nowadays wasn't in use in those times, obviously, but you get to see older medicine, you get to see old medical records. It's a very interesting segment of the episode to just see the history of the island and how long the island actually has been around, because, I mean, we know for a fact that the culture of summertime rendering, like the people on the island, they've been around for a long time. Like, that culture has just been going on for probably centuries. But the fact is we got to see it for ourselves. We got to see the culture and the medical history, etc., to just show how long that this society has been on this island and potentially intermingling with, you know, Shadows itself, and how the very lore and structure of the island is probably so intertwined with Shadows that it's basically its origin point, because that very statue of Hiruko, which is basically like a child of Izanami and Izanagi, you know, that was a very fascinating lore bit with mythology kind of thrown in, like, you know, Japanese mythology thrown in to kind of add relevance to the story. It's very cool because it's like, it shows if we're going along with mythology, that means like the very beginning of society, these shadows have potentially been there. And as we've already kind of seen a few times, is shadows can apparently adapt in some ways. They adapt and evolve, and we can probably assume that maybe Ushio, to a certain extent, the shadow we know, is probably adapted in some way to be different. And it makes you wonder, did at one point shadows, were they the top of the food chain constantly stronger, and did they lose power? Were shadows one time coexisting with humans perfectly in harmony, and did something happen? There's a lot of questions, but I really like that lore bit. There was a lot of lore and world building with that segment that you can really gather, which has kind of been obvious. Like, you could have gotten in information already, like, you know, with passing conversations of the characters, but to just visually see it at the clinic and just the history and all that, that's nice. I like that type of stuff. Big fan. Obviously, I don't think everybody's going to care about it to the same extent I do, because I'm a big sucker for world building, lore, etc. And I know not everybody cares about that to the same degree, but I do. But anyways, let's talk about the other thing, which is the fact that the baby shadows. So what are they? What's going on there? They're able to manipulate their shadows, move around, go around objects, etc. We saw that within the episode. But if you look at it, they seem very different. For instance, they lack eyes. They're not able to really see. They can only smell things, and they act very infantile. For instance, they act like an infant. And I mean, their very shape and mass is very similar to that. So it makes me wonder if, like, whatever's going on here might be the origins of the shadows itself. For instance, shadows had to come from somewhere. We know there has to be, like, an origin point for shadows, because, like, they have to come from somewhere. And since we're getting into mythology, etc. with the story, we could potentially assume that maybe either A, these babies are the starting point of the shadows and how they eventually evolve to become something different, or B, it's experimentations by, you know, the doctor that was running the clinic. I'm inclined to believe B, but the A stuff can also be true. It could be a mix of both as well. Who knows? But the point is that clearly there is some storytelling being told by the fact that the shadows are all looking the exact same and after a baby itself. I mean, maybe what the doctor was researching was what all humans basically research sometimes, like, you know, doctors, etc. in stories, immortality, the ability to bring back the dead. Because when you think about Ushio's circumstance right now, technically, Ushio has technically been brought back to a certain degree. Like, even though her original is dead, she's still kind of alive. And obviously this brings into the philosophical questions you can ask yourself, is it really Ushio? And the series has already kind of tried to talk about that. So maybe the doctor is trying to research how to maybe create life, play God, basically, you know, stuff like that. It definitely isn't unbelievable to think that maybe that's why all the baby shadows are down there, to create life in some way, to bring someone back to life if they're already dead. So many things, and maybe that has to play with, like, Shinpei's time-traveling capabilities and how that's going to play into that. But, yeah, overall, summertime rendering today, fantastic, as always. Like, seriously, I never expected that episode. It was a good episode. Felt like 5 minutes. Am I the only one that felt that? You know, let me know in the comments below. But I guess I'll wrap up this video here. Thank you so much for watching. If I gave you any form of entertainment, you enjoyed yourself, leave me a like. It does help me out a lot. And once again, sorry about the wind. Actually, I want to say that because it's been very windy today. But I love you all. Be safe. Stay healthy. Chibi out.